Hi, I promised to share a few stories about my adventures and what got me into Latin America with educators going global. So here's the one that I like to talk about that got me started and interested in Latin America specifically. As many of you know, and if you listen to the podcast that we did, I'm originally from Texas in the United States, and I eventually went international in the year 2000. But this story is one of my favorites to tell about how I got started and how I got interested in Latin America. So basically, when my first when I met my first wife, she was teaching. She came in as a long-term substitute teacher at the school I was teaching at in Houston, Texas, and she had just come from teaching for a year and a half in Thailand, and she's the one who introduced me to international teaching and said that eventually she would like to go back out. We were just dating at that time, and so it was something that I would definitely willing to consider. But, of course, I had the same concerns that other people do about leaving your family, leaving your home country, finding employment abroad, and what would that be like. But during that time, some other things happened to me also, and I'm not sure which of these came first, but at the time, I do remember being interested and introduced to a pamphlet that I found at a festival. Houston is notorious for having outdoor festivals because we have good weather most of the year around. And I found this guy who had participated, a pamphlet about this guy who had participated in the Cuban Revolution named Pombo. And he turned out to be one of the leaders in the group that helped with the Cuban Revolution. And he went into the revolution with someone he strongly believed in as well, which was Che Guevara. And that is when I first heard of Che Guevara and then found his story to be quite interesting. So I started reading books about Che Guevara, including the big red John Lee Anderson book, which I think is one of the best biographies I've ever read, and definitely a book that can be life-changing for you. During that time, I also had read Che Guevara's book of Motorcycle Diaries, and I found that really interesting. Someone just taking off, on a motorcycle and traveling around country to country without knowing where they were going to wind up, where they were going to sleep, what was going to happen to them, and that was pretty exciting. So that was like a positive part of my life, but also I had some negative things happen around that time as well. Which the main one that still sticks with me is that both my father and my mother passed away 3 months apart. And they hadn't even spoken to each other in 25 years since their separation, except for once at my brother's funeral. And then all of a sudden, they both passed away 3 months apart. And, one of the things any of you have experienced losing your parents, it doesn't matter what age you are, you can't help but feel like an orphan when something like that happens. So I was in my 30s at that time. And I just it really messed me up. I mean, I was really confused about life and what I wanted to do and what I had to do going forward. But one of the things that I recognized was that because my father and mother had passed away, I really didn't have any obligations that were going to make me stay in the United States. I have other family members, but I realized I could go back and visit them probably about as frequently as I did while I was living in the United States. So in the year 2000, I decided to sell all my crap. I sold everything. I sold my truck. I sold my furniture. I just had a big garage sale out in front of my house there. And I sold everything and I donated my library. That was probably one of the mistakes I made by giving away my library, because there were just so many books in there that I'll never be able to find again, because I'm kind of a fiend for used bookstores. And so, but that was what it was, and I donated it to a men's shelter. And so I hope that those books went to really good use. But anyway, I got down to 2 suitcases basically, and I decided that I wanted to go abroad. Well, I had been teaching a young man from Argentina uh, in my years there in Houston. I was a debate coach. And I was teaching this young man, and he was one of my top debaters, and we became to be really good friends. In fact, I was there for him kind of when his parents decided to get divorced, and I knew the family well. I had dinners with them and lots of things like that, and they had always invited me to come to their estancia in Argentina. They have a huge ranch in Argentina, and after the divorce, that's where the father decided to retire, and he moved back to Argentina to live there. Well, I was still in Houston, and my student, the son of these people, also honored me with asking me to be his best man in his wedding. So as you can see, I was really, really close with the family. And so then when my parents passed away and I was really messed up about all of this, that seemed like a really good, logical thing for me to do, is to go to Argentina, try to learn enough Spanish, get a motorcycle, and try to follow the route of Che Guevara around Latin America. Well, they thought I was a bit crazy when I decided to do this, and I think they even tried to talk me out of it at the time, but I was dead set on it. I was like, no, I've got to do this. I need to get out of here. I need to clear my head, and I need to think about what I'm going to do with life. And that was the one clear thought that I had. So, like I said, I sold all my stuff. I got down to 2 suitcases that I put at a friend's house, and I got a backpack, a sleeping bag, and a tent, a little tiny tent also that I could carry around on my backpack that wasn't too heavy and that I could sleep in. It was considered a 2-person tent, but as you can see, I'm a pretty big guy, and so it was quite comfy for me. So I took off to Argentina, and the father of my student was very happy to receive me in Buenos Aires when I arrived there, and we hung out there for a week. But he was living down on the ranch, which is 6 hours northwest of Buenos Aires, in a little town called Bobril. It's I think it's spelled Bobril, pronounced Bobril, in the state of Paraná. And so I went there but I had 2 choices, or I had a choice. I had the choice to live in the house with the patron, the father of my student, which had all the great creature comforts that you could want. But the problem with that was that he and his current partner, they spoke English. So I was worried that I was going to be too lazy about learning Spanish if I went to stay with them. So there was another house on the ranch that the workers stayed in, and but that house had no electricity, no hot water, and no heat in the house. And I showed up in August, which those of you who are familiar with South America realize that the southern hemisphere, that's their winter time. So I slept in this kind of huge bedroom, but had nothing else in it except for a bed and about a dozen blankets that I was able to get under at night. And I would have to get up early in the morning and take a shower before going to work, because also I wanted to work with the workers, which was part of clearing brush, moving cattle around, riding horses to and from work, and basically just doing a lot of manual labor. And I was paid the same as the workers, 10 pesos a day. But I also got the opportunity to speak with them in Spanish throughout. I had to communicate with them in Spanish, and I also had to communicate with the foreman and his wife, who took care of the house that we lived in. and they also lived in the house, and his wife cooked for us or would send us with food for the day because we would eat lunch on the work site where we were at during that day. So I wound up doing that for a month, and I didn't miss any of the time there, except for one day my hands got so swollen from swinging the sickle to clear the monte, which is the tall grass and bushes and stuff like that were around this little lake that the patron wanted me to clear out, and I was really getting a lot of tough labor. I was having to shovel gravel and stuff like that, and so one of the days my hands swelled up, and I missed work. That was the only sick day that I took. But the workers there couldn't understand, why would somebody leave a perfectly good job in the United States to come and work on a ranch in Argentina? And I think they had all these theories about why I was there. But the patron said he couldn't explain it to the workers in a way that was believable to them. So he just told them that I was writing a book, which is kind of what I was doing, because I was keeping a journal during this whole time of doing that. And so then I wound up staying there for about a month. And I figured by that time I'd learned enough Spanish that I could get around. I just had a little book that had words and phrases in it. And that's what I worked out of. And then I would make up silly sentences and stuff like that to talk with the workers. And I would play chess with them at night underneath the lanterns and stuff like that before we would go to bed. And I got a lot of great experience out of that. And so I decided after 1 month to leave. But the patron told me, he said, hey, you cost me a lot of money. And I said, how's that? I'm here working the same way that the workers are working, and making 10 pesos a day. And he said, no, I had a bet with Patrick that you wouldn't last more than a week. And I was like, oh my God, you mean you've been working me like a dog because you had a bet with your son over this? So it was what it was. So I wound up taking off after that with my tent and my backpack and my sleeping bag, and I worked my way around Argentina, and then I went up, crossed over from Mendoza, Argentina, over the mountains into Chile, and went into Santiago, Chile, and I spent a month going up the coast there. And there's a lot more stories I could tell along with this, but, to try to keep it brief, I spent a month going up the coast of Chile, and I was headed to Peru. I wanted to do Machu Picchu, but some people that I ran into, I met up with them in right before I was crossing, when I was leaving Chile, and they convinced me that it was worth going to Bolivia and spending some time there. And I did take that train from Antofagasta, which is in the north of Chile, that takes you all the way into the desert in Bolivia. And that was kind of a nightmare because they left us sitting there on the train tracks for like 12 hours before their train came to get us and take us into Potosí, Bolivia. And I did find Bolivia to be very, very exciting, and I wound up spending an entire month there. It was really fantastic. Bolivia is a very, very interesting country. But at that time also, I was on my way to Brazil because my girlfriend, the one that had been teaching in Thailand, she was still teaching in the United States, and she was coming to visit me in Brazil. And we had an agreement to meet up. I believe we were going to meet in Rio, or we were going to, I think it was Rio we were going to meet up with. But the thing was that I took off across the Bolivia, the Chaparre there, where there's no roads. It's all dirt roads and everything, and these little Kumbi vans. And I got there, and I was ready to cross over into Brazil. But then they were looking through my passport, and they're like, where's your visa? And I was like, what visa? They told me when I left Santa Cruz that I don't need a visa because I'm a U.S. citizen and I can just cross in. And they're like, no, we have the reciprocal agreement with the United States that they have to have a visa to enter Brazil. And I was like, well, I'm here. What are you going to do? And they're like, nope, you got to go back. And I was like, oh my God, I had to ride 24 hours again through the Chipare all the way back to Santa Cruz because that was the nearest city to where I was crossing the border to go back, go to the Brazilian embassy there and get a visa. And so I was really upset about this. I went back, I got the visa and everything, and then I 24 hours again, all the way through the Chipare on a little bus that kept dying out on us. We had to get out of the bus in the middle of the night, a bunch of the men, and push start the bus so that it could keep going and they could get us to our destination on the border of Brazil. And there's more stories with this that, as I keep thinking of this going through. And so I made it through, and then I was trying to figure out where was a good location because my girlfriend had already landed in Brazil, and we were supposed to meet up, and we were hoping to get married in Rio. I had proposed to her before I had left and everything and given her a cheap ring that I bought somewhere. And so anyway, we finally wound up meeting in this one city that was kind of off of the beaten path. And we went on to Rio, and we had a good time there, but there was not really an opportunity for us to find a way to get married there. So we went from there to Falls de Iguaçu, where the big waterfalls are between the border of Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. And we met a really wonderful lady that was the manager of the hotel that we were staying in. She spoke very fluent English because she had been working in the United States for a few years as a nurse. And we told her we were interested in getting married in Brazil, and she said, oh, I can help you with that, you know. And so she got on the phone, and she was like, toot, 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 you know, and all this stuff. And she called the priest, and the priest is like, yes, I can marry them. And then she arranged the van with this travel industry people that were right next door to the hotel that we were staying. And she got us a photographer and everything. And so while we were in there having breakfast, because we'd just come in from a long overnight bus ride, she comes in and she's like, okay, y'all are getting married. And we're like, when? And she says, tomorrow. And both me and my girlfriend just looked at each other. And she's like, I'm not hungry anymore. I was like, me either. So we kind of stopped, and we wound up getting married over Falls do Iguaçu. And apparently we were the first people to ever get married at the falls, because the Brazilians apparently normally have their weddings at night, and so they don't really do outdoor weddings. Or at least that was the story we were told. And they took pictures of our wedding so that they could put it in the brochure, because they thought it would be a great idea for other people to get married over the waterfalls as well. So that was part of my trip there. And then my girlfriend, now wife, had to go back to the United States after the Christmas break was over, because she was still working in the U.S. But by that point in time, she had landed a job in Venezuela, and we were going to be on our way to Venezuela to work in August. And I wound up finishing out my trip by going into Uruguay and getting to see some of the beauty of that wonderful country as well. And then went back to the ranch to tell everybody goodbye before I was able to catch my flight to from Buenos Aires back to Houston. And so that definitely sold me on Latin America. I got to see a large amount of it, but I really missed some key areas, that I've tried to go back to and still am trying to go back to. And I've actually just had a knee replacement surgery, and I have Machu Picchu in my mind. So we'll see what happens here. And but that is what led me to Latin America. And even though I've gone abroad and taught in Africa and Asia for 7 years in between Venezuela, and then coming back to Latin America, and now living again in my fourth country in Latin America. I definitely have fallen in love with it. I think it is probably the place that I will live out the rest of my life, however long that may be. And as long as the Latinos will have me, and I really enjoy living in Latin America, working in Latin America, and trying to help other people get jobs here as well, because I want other people to have the same opportunities I've had to experience the greatness of this region of the world. So I'd love to tell more stories about this. There's a ton of them in there, but hopefully this gave you an idea, and it wasn't too long, and I didn't bore you too much or put you to sleep.